Speaker, I want to make a statement on housing and building safety. Beyond the COVID-19 pandemic, the government wants to build back better. Better homes, better infrastructure, and better communities. But the foundations of these ambitions and the mission of my department are safety and fairness. We've all been moved by the stories we've heard and the people that we've met, homeowners, placed in difficult, sometimes impossible situations through no fault of their own. I appreciate the frustration, the worry, and at times the despair that they feel. I share their anger at the errors, the omissions, the false promises, and even the outright dishonesty that came before us, built up over many decades, but which this government is determined to tackle. That's why, Mr. Speaker, today I'm announcing an unprecedented intervention. A clear plan to remove unsafe cladding, to provide certainty to leaseholders, to make the industry pay for its faults of the past, to create a world-class building safety regime, and to inject confidence and certainty back into this part of the housing market. Firstly, we will finish the job that we've started on remediating unsafe cladding. After the tragedy of Grenfell Tower, the expert advice that this government received identified aluminium composite cladding, ACM, the material on the tower, as by far the most unsafe form of cladding. It should never have been used, and our independent expert advisory panel recommended that this should be the focus of our remediation work. Thanks to a very considerable effort, including during the pandemic, almost 95% of all high-rise buildings identified by the beginning of last year with unsafe ACM cladding have now been remediated, or workers are on site now doing the job, and that rises to 100% in social housing. And guided again by expert advice, the work to remove other types of cladding, which are also unsafe, albeit less so than ACM, where it poses a genuine risk to life, is also underway. It was always our expectation, our demand, that building owners and developers should step up to meet the cost of this work. Where they haven't, or where they no longer exist, the government has stepped in, providing £1.6 billion to remediate unsafe cladding. However, it's clear that without further government intervention, many building owners will simply seek to pass these potentially very significant costs on to leaseholders, as this is often the legal position in the leases that they signed. That would risk punishing those who've worked hard, who've bought their own home, but through no fault of their own have found themselves caught in an absolutely invidious situation. Importantly, it also risks slowing down the critical works to make these homes safer. I am therefore today making an exceptional intervention on behalf of the government and providing certainty that leaseholders in high-rise residential buildings will face no cost for cladding remediation works. We will make further funding available to pay for the removal and replacement of unsafe cladding for all leaseholders in high-rise residential buildings of 18 metres and above, or above 6 stories in England. We continue to take a safety-led approach, and this funding will focus on the higher-rise buildings where the independent expert advisory panel tells us, time and again, the overwhelming majority of the safety risk lies, in line with the existing Building Safety Fund and the anticipated scope of the new building safety regulator that we're establishing and will shortly be legislating for. This will ensure that we end the cladding scandal in a way that is fair and generous to leaseholders. Secondly, for lower and medium-rise blocks of flats, the risks are significantly lower, and the remediation of cladding is less likely to be needed. In many cases, it will not be needed at all. But where it is, costs can still be significant for leaseholders, which is why I'm announcing today that the government will develop a long-term scheme to protect leaseholders in this situation with financial support for cladding remediation on buildings between 4 and 6 stories. Under a long-term, low-interest scheme, no leaseholder will ever pay more than £50 a month towards the removal of unsafe cladding, many far less. Taken together, this means the government is providing more than £5 billion, including a further £3.5 billion announced today, plus the significant cost of the very generous financing scheme, which will run for many years to come, to ensure all leaseholders in medium and high-rise blocks face no costs or very low costs if cladding remediation is needed. Where it is, costs can still be significant for leaseholders, which is why we want to take these important steps. We want to ensure that the government develops this long-term scheme which will protect leaseholders with financial support. Taken together, this means that the government helps leaseholders to move forwards with greater certainty and more confidence about the future. Thirdly, whilst the problem is not one of leaseholders making, it is also the case that it cannot be right that the costs of addressing these issues fall solely on taxpayers, many of whom are not themselves homeowners and can only dream of getting on the housing ladder. The government has always expected the industry to contribute towards these costs, and some have done so. Today, I'm announcing that we will introduce a Gateway to Developer levy that will be implemented through the forthcoming Building Safety Bill. The proposed levy will be targeted and only apply when developers seek permission to develop certain high-rise buildings in England, helping to ensure the industry take collective responsibility for historic building safety defects. In introducing the levy, we will continue to ensure the homes our country needs get built and that our small and medium-sized builders are protected. In addition, a new tax will be introduced for the UK residential property development sector in 2022. This will raise at least £2 billion over a decade to help pay for cladding remediation costs. The tax will ensure the largest property developers make a fair contribution to the remediation programme in relation to the money they make from residential property, reflecting the benefit that they will derive from restoring confidence to the UK housing market. The government will consult on the policy design in due course. Fourthly, I know there are many people across the country who are concerned about the safety of their home. In the actions we've taken and those that we take today, we've already prioritised very clearly public safety. However, it's also important that we put the risk of a fire, and in particular, the risk of a fatal fire, into context. It is low. Last year, the number of people who died in fires in blocks of flats over 11 metres was 10, an all-time low. and fire-related fatalities in dwellings in England have fallen by 29% over the last decade. By way of comparison, over 1,700 fatalities were reported on our roads in 2019. Now, of course, any death is one too many, and the tragedy of Grenfell Tower lingers with us and demands action. That's why it's right that we address safety issues where they exist and are a threat to life, but do so in a proportionate way and guided at all times by expert advice. That is the approach we're taking through the Building Safety Bill, the new Building Safety Regulator, the Fire Safety Bill, and the new National Regulator of Construction Products that I announced in January. I'm determined that we have a world-class building safety regime. But lastly, we need everyone to follow this sensible, proportionate approach so that this part of the housing market can now move forwards and homeowners are not disproportionately impacted. The Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors have consulted on new guidance for valuers on when an EWS1 form should actually be required. The government endorses its work to ensure that assessors have a stronger basis on which to make good, proportionate judgments about valuation risk. Lenders have welcomed the progress on this guidance, which will help ensure that over 500,000 leaseholders in blocks of flats over 11 metres will not need a separate EWS1 assessment to get a mortgage. This builds on the interventions that we've already made to create and train many more assessors, and we're doing so further so that they can access professional indemnity insurance to get on with the job. So today, in addition to providing certainty to leaseholders, we're also providing confidence to lenders. And following discussions my right honourable friend the Chancellor and I have had with the lenders, we expect all of the major banks and building societies to strongly support today's intervention, which will provide greater certainty to the market and help to restore the effective lending, purchasing and selling of properties as soon as possible. Taken together, Mr. Speaker, this exceptional intervention amounts to the largest ever government investment in building safety. We believe in home ownership, and today we firmly support the hundreds of thousands of homeowners who need our help now. I commend this statement to the House.